Hey everybody, how you doing? It's me again, Truth Teacher, coming at you with a new video. So in this one, I'm gonna try to hit two topics in one because there's been a couple of things that have happened that are really being talked about a lot in the African diaspora community. So the first situation that we have is the Grammy Awards with this guy named Shaboozey. Now, I never heard of this guy ever until I started seeing, like social media blowing up, people being upset about his acceptance speech. So I went and I took a look at it myself to see what the hoopla was all about. So I heard what he had to say, and this is my take on it. Basically, he didn't say anything wrong. It was no lie, immigrants did build this country, okay? That is true. But what I think the part that people are getting upset about is that he didn't mention African Americans specifically and what they contributed to this country. And, for me, there's just certain things that it's like it doesn't need to be said because it's just a no brainer. Like everyone should know this by now. Um, you don't even have to have like a high school level grade of education to know that the economy of this nation, even before it was a country, when it was still a colony, it was based on the involuntary labor of the people who were brought here from Africa. And that goes the same for all of the nations pretty much in the Americas, okay, whether we're talking about the Caribbean, Central America, South America, or the United States, or what would come to be called the United States. But here's the thing. Number one, when you're in events like this, right, an award ceremony, you only have a limited amount of time to give a presentation. So that's number one. You're limited on the amount of time that you have. Number two is that, from what I gather, Shaboozy is a first generation American like me. He's the first one in his family born on American soil. So he still has a foot in, the United States and in Nigeria. And right now, and it's not to say that African Americans are not going through things now because of this administration, but I'm going to get to that later. But the amount of rhetoric that has been launched against those of us who are of immigrant backgrounds or who are immigrants, outright, who were here, whether they be naturalized American citizens or immigrants who are still in the process of getting their paperwork done or illegals. We've been facing a lot of vitriol from all areas. Back in the day, you would have expected this to come from white nationalists. I mean, like, nobody's surprised about that. But we even see it coming from, crazy enough as it is, other people who are not categorized as white. Like a lot of it has been coming from certain segments of the African American community. And I say certain segments because it's not the entire African American community at all by any stretch of the imagination, but still, it's disturbing when you see people who are, for all intents and purposes, share a lot in your background with African Americans were brought here against their will. people in the Caribbean, people of African descent in the Caribbean and Latin America were brought there against their will. So and on top of that, the reason why a lot of us ended up coming here was because of the policies of the United States that negatively impacted our existence in our home countries. And so the United States goes in, they do things, they destabilize governments, they tamper with the economy, they make things such that it's not possible for people to sustain themselves back home. And so they end up having to come here. So we see what's happening with certain governmental agencies. I don't even want to give them energy by, calling their names out. And we're being made the face of everything that's wrong with American society, right? That's being placed on our backs. Nigeria has sustained damage from this administration. They went in and they bombed certain locations in Nigeria under the pretext of protecting Christians. Which is really funny because you would think that if they were really that concerned about protecting the lives of Christians, then they would be actually doing something to protect the Christians who are the first communities of people who heard Jesus Christ's teachings and followed his path. People in towns that we call Bethlehem, Nazareth, in the Galilee, places that in the news we hear referred to as the West Bank, Gaza. And we know for a fact that people, they're Christians. Okay, I'm not even talking about Muslims. I'm talking about Christians, are having their homes destroyed, forcefully taken away. They're being beaten. They're being killed outright. We have video footage showing them being killed, point blank, shot, point blank, in cold blood. And somehow or another, it's okay for that to happen. It's okay to unalive the descendants of the very first Christians in the entire world, in their homeland. But you're so concerned about Christians in Nigeria that you got to go and drop bombs on them. Which makes you wonder, well, if the first Christians are not being protected, but they're protecting Christians in Nigeria, well, what is it that Nigeria has that place doesn't have? Well, we know Nigeria has oil. Surprise, surprise. We see their activities in another country in South America who also has oil, and they went in there and kidnapped the president under the pretext of protecting the United States from drug trafficking, when we know that the majority of drugs that are coming into this country are coming from a country on the north coast of South America that's just a little bit more west. But that country doesn't have oil. So, interesting, right? But anyway, we have people in our communities, even when they're here legally, being targeted and being disappeared. So, being that he is connected to a community that's being persecuted right now by this administration, one of the countries that's been put on a visa ban, to the United States. Interesting that most of them are on the African continent and in the Caribbean. So, yes, his main focus is the fact that people of immigrant backgrounds here in the United States are being targeted. So that's what's going to be foremost in his mind. And you can't blame him for that. You can't fault him for that. Once again, it doesn't mean that no one is recognizing the sacrifice that African Americans have gone through or what they have fought for that allows us to be here right now, enjoying certain rights that are being slowly eroded away as we speak. But we'll get to that later. But, like when your house is on fire, you're going to take care of your own family first before you go and check in on the neighbors. And then again, like I said, like you would really have to be a special kind of stupid if you don't know that it was the African Americans, or who would come to be called African Americans, who really laid much of the foundation of the economic power of this country in the first place, right? But on the other hand, the fact of the matter is that immigrants from many different places, not just, Africa or the Caribbean, but even a large part of Europe, did contribute to the economic strength of this country also. And listen, let me tell you something. They did not have an easy time of it. If you want to get an idea of what it was like, I would recommend that you read the book The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And it really shows you just how horrible the life experiences were for people who were up here in the North, right? Basically, it was just overall exploitation. This country's economic strength was built on the backs of the exploitation of people who came here involuntarily, as well as people who came here voluntarily out of desperation. And when they got here, they were horribly exploited. So we can't turn a blind eye to that reality also. It's not saying that one is more valuable than the other. And yes, in an ideal world, it would have been nice if he was able to tell the full story. But then again, like I said, you got 5 hot minutes or whatever. How deep can you dig? You know? I think also while we're talking about people who have contributed to this country, we need to go all the way back and acknowledge the people who were already here before anyone else when these European colonists showed up. Because especially on the northeast coast in New England, right? If it hadn't been for the help of those native communities, the colonies would not have been able to get a foothold in the first place, okay? It was those Native Americans who saved those colonists because they came here with no survival skills whatsoever, okay? And they're the ones that showed them how to cultivate the soil, what type of plants to plant, and how to plant them. And they're the ones who made the ground suitable for farming in the first place. Anywhere you go on the eastern coast and you see a town or a community with the name Field in it, those were previous Native American communities where they had done the hard work of digging up the stones and the rocks and everything to make the ground fertile to be able to be cultivated, okay? Because farming is a lot more labor intensive than people think. You don't just dig a hole and put some stuff in and it grows up. No. There's a lot that you have to do in preparing the soil. And those places were made viable for agriculture because of the Native American communities that were here before. So when we talk about something like Thanksgiving, and there's that story of, the pilgrims had a bountiful harvest, and out of the kindness of their hearts, they invited their Native American neighbors to break bread with them. No, bitch. They saved you, okay? They were the ones that fed your behinds because y'all was starving to the point where you were digging up corpses. Go look it up. So, no, it wasn't they were treating the Native Americans. It was the Native Americans saved their behinds. And you look at all the foods that we associate with Thanksgiving, they're all American foods or foods that are native to this side of the Atlantic. Turkeys, sweet potatoes or yams, cranberries, all of that stuff that we associate with Thanksgiving, those are Native American foods. Pumpkins, all of that, corn, all of that came from the people who were originally here, who took pity on these people who were starving and helped them to get themselves on their feet. The reason why the North was able to win the Civil War was because at that point they had abolished slavery in the North. Why? Because they were relying on industrialization. Now, they were still tied in with the slave system in the South because the raw cotton was grown by slave labor in the South. But where did that raw cotton go? It came up to the North. It came up to New England to go to the mills to be processed into thread and woven into cloth. And the people who were working in those mills, for the most part, were immigrants. Okay? And they were exploited terribly, terribly exploited. When you look at the skyline of a city like New York, a lot of people would be tempted to, oh, look at what we did. Did you know that all those skyscrapers, including the iconic Empire State Building, you know who did most of the construction on those buildings? Native Americans, Mohawks in particular, were the ones who were responsible for that construction. So not only did they help these people get themselves up on their feet, but they even contributed in building the infrastructure that was the hallmark of their economic boom, getting back to the Civil War. Because they were industrialized. It was New England where they made ships and weapons, and they had, forgeries where they made artillery and all of that stuff. That was all made in the North. The railroads, all of that stuff, transportation, that was all in the North. Okay? And once again, it relied on immigrant labor. So when you had all these yahoos up here talking about, filthy Eastern Europeans and, these Catholic Italians and these dirty Irish and all of this, when they were talking that mess, the people who actually ran these factories, those were the ones who were bringing them over here to be cheap labor. And that's how the northern states were able to get the upper hand to win the Civil War. But a lot of people forget about all of that. So once again, with Shaboozy, he didn't lie. He didn't say anything wrong, but would have been nice if he had mentioned African Americans. Yes, it would have been. But I can also understand why the immigrant community was the thing that was foremost in his mind at that point. So I really don't think that you need to go and read more into it than what, oh, he was disrespecting us. No, 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 no. Listen, you got to pick your battles. Not everything is worth all of that emotional, exertion about. Pick your battles because there's more things that the African American community really needs to be more upset about than some celebrity who a lot of people didn't even know exists and his 5-minute speech at the Grammys. Speaking of another awards ceremony, we have the situation with the BAFTA Awards. I don't know what the hell it is about awards ceremony, Lord God. So there's this award ceremony. Um, Once again, something that I don't pay attention to because I think all of these award ceremonies are bullshit, including the Oscars, including the Miss Universe pageant, Miss America, Miss Universe, all of that shit, Miss World. I think it's all bullshit. I don't think it's sincere at all because the people who should be winning those awards are not getting those awards. For example, when I stopped watching was when they passed over the movie The Color Purple and they gave the award for best movie, best everything to some other movie that I can't even remember what the hell it was. I think it was A River Runs Through It with Meryl Streep. I think. Don't hold me to that. But anyway, it was something that was, yeah, it won an award, but so forgettable. Color Purple, even though it didn't win any awards, listen, there ain't nobody that hasn't seen The Color Purple. They still running that movie today. It's still getting views, okay? All this time. And it connects with people on an emotional level like very few movies ever can. They didn't give Whoopi Goldberg, she acted her ass off in that movie, okay? Whoopi Goldberg, Oprah Winfrey, there were so many people who should have won awards, got nothing. The next year, they give Whoopi Goldberg an Oscar for the role that she played in Ghost. Now, don't get me wrong, Ghost was a nice movie. I enjoyed it. But how the hell are you going to compare the emotional complexity of the acting that she did in Color Purple to what she did in Ghost? Make that shit make sense. So all of these awards are bullshit in my estimation. But anyway, we have these two African American actors and they're doing their presentation. And out of nowhere, somebody blurts out not one, but two slurs. Now, they said that the individual who did this was suffering from Tourette syndrome. But here's a couple of things. Number one, yeah, Tourette's will make you have tics and you blurt things out, but that should have to be in your mind in the first place for it to come out. That's your inside voice coming out, okay? That's one thing. Second thing is the BBC deliberately bleeped out things that other presenters had said during the evening if they deemed it to be sensitive or controversial, right? That got bleeped out. Bleep, 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 bleep. Every time somebody said a word that was, like a hot button, it got bleeped out. And it didn't go to live airing. So tell me why you got somebody sitting there in the audience and he makes two really offensive outbursts, but you let that pass through. BBC. Explain that one to me. It's obvious that it was done deliberately. It was allowed to go through deliberately. And you might ask yourself why. And look, I think that it's very obvious in light of the way things are being played out in the world right now that there are forces who have a vested interest in creating atmospheres of chaos, turmoil, having people get all in their feelings, having people be, at loggerheads with each other. It's a divide and rule tactic, okay? And it's meant as a distraction to distract you from things that are really important that you should be focusing on, to keep people divided so that they can't come together and make coalitions that would challenge the status quo. And lo and behold, it's like a week later, I wake up on Saturday to hear that we've dropped bombs on Iran. I thought we were having negotiations. But why should that be a surprise? Because it's not the first time something like this has happened when there were supposed to be negotiations happening and a bomb gets dropped right on the center where the negotiations are happening. Like we forget what happened in Qatar last year, a few months ago, really, right? So why should we be surprised that this was going to happen? But once again, like anytime you see crazy, inconsequential bullshit popping up and all over the place, you got to ask yourself, what are they trying, like what's really going on behind the scenes? Because something really important must be going on. And this is a diversionary tactic. So, yes, the BBC did do that deliberately. And it was aimed at not only African Americans, but at people of the African diaspora as a whole. However, once again, I would say that as people of the diaspora, we need to choose our battles. It's not everything that happens that we need to get, let it get under our skin and ruffle our feathers. I think it would behoove us to be selective in our outrage. Because the fact of the matter is that there are very real, serious things that are happening in our communities that we should be pitching a bitch about, but we're not. We're not being outraged at the abysmal state of our educational system. And if you all know me for a while, you know that once upon a time, I was a school teacher and I walked away from the profession. To make a long story short, most of our kids that I was working with, and I worked in the Bronx in several locations, a significant percentage of our children are functionally illiterate because they never got the foundation that they needed in literacy on the elementary school level. And I recognized that from my first job, and I was alarmed. I went to the principal, the first school that I worked in. I went to the principal and I told him, we have a serious problem here. Your top class is illiterate. What I was expecting is that we would sit down and come up with a plan that, well, we need to do something about this. Instead, what happened was they took my license away from me illegally, and I was blacklisted. I won't go into all the details, that would take too much time, but I had my license illegally suspended. When I got it back, 2.5 years later, I worked in several other schools and I saw the same pattern. And finally, the last school that I was in, that was the one where I was like, you know what? I'm out. It wasn't because of the student behavior, because I knew how to handle my students, okay? That was not the issue. The issue was I didn't know how to handle administration, because they expected me not only to give passing grades to children who didn't know how to read and write properly, but to make them pass a Regents. When the Regents itself is a literacy exam. History, English, math, science, all the Regents exams are literacy exams. You need to know how to read and write properly in order to pass those exams. And since our kids were illiterate, suffice it to say, they could not pass the exam. And guess who got blamed for that? The teachers. We got blamed for the fact that these students hadn't been taught how to read and write properly in grammar school. Yet and still, the one time they put me to work with a special ed class, these kids had just been abandoned. They were in the 8th grade. They didn't even know the freaking alphabet. Now, these were children who were, I guess you would say, mildly retarded, but they weren't like severely autistic or anything like that. There was one girl who was just like, really, really severely disabled. And yeah, school was basically like a place, for a glorified babysitting center, daycare. But all the rest of them, I had to teach them. Now, I was supposed to teach them history, but I couldn't do anything with them. I couldn't use a textbook with them. I couldn't even write anything up, my own materials for them. They didn't even know the alphabet. I had to teach them the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, all the way to Z. I had to teach them the alphabet. Next, I had to teach them the sounds that the letters make. Then I had to teach them the vowels and the sounds those made. And then I had to teach them how to put those words together, those letters together, to make words. I was making progress with them. There was one kid there that his reading level went through the roof because he wasn't stupid. He just was never taught. They caught on. Principal comes in. Where are you in the curriculum? I said, the early colonial period. And where are you supposed to be? I said, the Civil War. What? You need to get them in the textbook. You need to be teaching them. I'm like, you don't understand. They could not read. I had to teach them how to read. You need to give them assignments and reading assignments and use the textbook. I said, you're not getting it. You're not hearing what I'm telling you. These children could not read. I had to teach them the alphabet. They could not read. I had to teach them the alphabet. Teach them how to read everything from scratch. What they didn't get in elementary school, I had to teach it to them. And then I used history as a platform to improve their literacy. She raked my ass over hot coals, then pulled me out of that class. And I guarantee, I don't know what happened to those kids, but I guarantee you, they went no further because nobody before me thought to do what I did. And if she's going to be up their ass like white on rice, nobody after me did right by those kids either. So after working in this high school, which was in the Walton High School building up in the Bronx, after working there for 3 years, I was like, I'm out. I can't do this. They want me to give passing grades to children who cannot read. And look, I told myself I would rather eat rice and beans for the rest of my life than to go into a classroom and look kids in the eyes every day and know that I'm screwing them over just so that I can get a steady paycheck and benefits and a pension. And I left, and that's when I made dance my full-time career. So we've got issues like that in our community that we really need to be concerned about because they're not in a position where they're able to compete on an international level. Now, because of what's going on, and you know, when everything was going on in Gaza, there were a lot of black people, that ain't my fight. I'm staying out of this one. That ain't got nothing to do with me. Well, it didn't just stop with Gaza. Now we're the closest we have ever been to World War III happening. And if the shit escalates and goes the way that it looks like it's going, guess who's going to be put on the front lines? Just a guess. I don't have no kids of my own, but I do have nephews. My cousins have children, boys. I'm very concerned. I'm looking at what's happening in the world and the way civilian lives are being treated. Now, you have the technological capability to take out the leader in that country. And yet still you had to go and bomb an elementary school of girls. So if you can do that over there, and meanwhile now, mind you, what's been happening to Black American people in this country for decades when it comes to law enforcement and realizing that those law enforcement agencies were trained by the other international entity that is in this war with Iran, the people who are doing what they did, what they're still doing in Gaza, even though there's supposed to be a ceasefire, constantly violating that, unarmed civilians in the West Bank. You see how these people are fighting back when they do fight back. What are they fighting back with? Slingshots, slings, stones, against Uzis and assault rifles. Just think about that. And we have a system where African American and Latino people are unalived by law enforcement, even when we have it on video, where you have people with their arms up. and they still get shot down, and then it gets ruled unjustifiable. It really has me extremely worried about what could be coming next. And if they've gotten to the point where they're even willing to shoot white people point blank in the face, unarmed, not a threat, it makes me worried about what could possibly be in store for us. I've grown up my whole life. And look, to be perfectly honest with you, all I've been for the majority of my adult life living in a state of chronic depression. Starting from the time when I graduated from high school, because that was when I became personally aware of the way people in this society who are not categorized as white are treated. And I grew up seeing young Black American and Puerto Rican men in New York City being killed by law enforcement, execution style, with their hands handcuffed behind their back and face down on the concrete and getting shot in the back of the head because they were a threat. How the hell are you a threat when you are handcuffed and lying face down on your belly? How are you endangering the life of a police officer? And I've watched year after year after year after year of seeing our people executed. Amadou Diallo. I don't remember the kids' names. That there were two Puerto Rican brothers. They were in the street. They were playing football, and the football accidentally hit a cop car, and they were shot, dead. And every single year, every single time, when it goes to court, the ruling comes back. It was justifiable. So, you know, when the OJ case came out and he got off, a lot of people were surprised that we, in the communities of color, we were celebrating. It wasn't because we necessarily cared about OJ himself, but it was because it was like, now you know how it feels. That's what it was. That's what it really was about. Because we have been for decades enduring this kind of thing and nothing happens. The killer of Emmett Till, who they knew who did it. They didn't do a day in jail. And the woman who accused him of inappropriate behavior, they know that she lied. They let her die a peaceful death in her own bed. So yeah, every time I hear of these things, it's like I have a pit in the bottom of my stomach every single time. And I just have to take a deep breath. And so that's where I've been. until now. And, you know, when I see these things happening in the media, these award shows, I really don't give a fuck. Seriously, I really don't. When some celebrity says something stupid, I really could give a fuck. I don't care because I'm looking at real things happening that we need to be aware of and alarmed about. I'm looking at real travesties of justice. I'm looking at real people losing their lives. Real shit is what I'm looking at and what I'm concerned about. That's where my mind is. I don't give a fuck about any of these celebrities. I don't listen to their music. I watch them in a movie, okay, it's entertaining, but I don't memorize their names. Oh, this one, that. I could give a fuck. I really don't care. But what I do care about is the lives of real people and the state that our country is in, and the fact that day after day after day, little by little by little, our rights are being stolen. I consider the fact that by the time my mother and father were 24 years old, they were able to own their own home. And I look at today's society where you have children graduating from college with advanced degrees, and they can't even buy a home. A lot of them can't even find employment, much less to buy a home. And my parents didn't have no highfalutin advanced degrees. My mother was a lab tech, and my dad was, what did he do? He worked in Manufacturers Hanover. I don't remember exactly what he did. And they were able to afford a middle class standard of living. And we can't do that now. My sister, God bless her, bought her first home. She left the New York City area altogether because she couldn't find something in a decent price in areas adjacent to New York City. They were showing it, when I tell you, they were literally showing her shacks for like $800,000. Talk about, oh, you could fix it up, fixer uppers that look like, Lord have mercy. This is where we are in this country. Day by day, the powers that be are turning this place into a third world country. So forgive me if I really don't give a fuck about Shaboozy or Orlando or the other guy that was in Black Panther. I don't even remember their names. I don't really give a fuck. Forgive me. I'm I'm concerned about what's going to happen to black and brown people real time in this society. That's what I'm concerned about. So my advice to everyone, to just wrap this all up, don't let these people manipulate you emotionally, because this is what they want to do. They want to get you all wound up emotionally, because when you're emotional, you're not rational. And when you're not rational, you can be easily controlled. So, them's my 2 cents, and I will see you all on the next one. Peace out.